The silence that fell upon Blackwood Manor was not the tranquility of peace. It was the chilling, profound echo of 4 long years of brutal, senseless conflict. This terrifying silence had devoured the merriment, the prosperity, the very foundation of the estate, and ultimately the life of Frederick, Vivienne Beaumont's husband. 3 months after the armistice, only the cold, hard ash of ruin remained. Vivienne, the proud mistress of the legendary estate, carried the immense weight of her noble lineage like a perpetual, suffocating burden, a rigid, painful stiffness in her spine, a constant internal chill that no drawing-room fire could dispel from her silk gowns. Blackwood, once renowned for its ancient towering oak groves and its vast profitable tobacco fields, was now a desolate portrait of aristocratic decay, its neglected grandeur a cruel, hollow mockery of her devastating reality. The war had not ended cleanly. It had bled resources, manpower, and faith from the land. Vivienne's perpetual black mourning dress was both a uniform of unending grief and a fragile armor against the creditors who were circling the property like opportunistic vultures. The debts, a disastrous, complex tangle of wartime bonds, desperate loans taken at ruinous rates, and compounding interest, were poised to seize her family's legacy in one final brutal blow. The final notice from the regional bank lay rigid and terrifying on her mahogany desk, its stark ultimatum demanding full payment by the rapidly approaching autumn harvest, a deadline she knew, with cold, heart-wrenching certainty, she could never meet. The loss meant not just penury, but the obliteration of the Beaumont name from history. Her only company in the vast, echoing mansion was the loyal, elderly cook, Mrs. Hollis, and the growing, chilling specter of doom. The few remaining field hands had long since scattered, finding work with new, less ruined landowners, or having been crippled by the war itself. Blackwood was dying, the soil hardened and neglected, the manor freezing, and her profound, stubborn pride was the last, most unyielding asset yet to be truly liquidated. It was Mrs. Hollis who brought the news, and the subsequent unsettling shock, to the drawing room. A man, Mrs. Beaumont. He came up the South Road about an hour ago, asking for work. Says he'll take anything for coin or for keep, ma'am. A laborer? Hollis, we have nothing left for a laborer. The last money is earmarked for seeds. Vivienne replied, turning from the massive window to look out at the ragged, overgrown horizon. He's strong, ma'am, formidable, but he's one of them. Vivienne froze, the word landing like a struck match. Them. The men who had worn the opposing colors, who had fought under the banner that had torn her life apart. They were the enemy. And her social standing, her moral code, and her very definition of self demanded she maintain her bitter scorn and absolute superiority. Yet, the desperate truth of the final notice weakened the bedrock of her deepest principles. Survival superseded hate. "Send him in," she commanded, her voice brittle with forced, thinning authority. The man who entered was a potent, disturbing study in sheer survival and physical endurance. He was tall, his frame lean, almost gaunt, but powerfully muscled, suggesting years spent in the harshest conditions of combat and relentless labor. His clothes were threadbare, salvaged from what looked like an old army issue, but his bearing was unwavering, almost militarily erect. His hands, when he removed a dusty cap, were huge, scarred, and heavily calloused, the unequivocal hands of a man accustomed to punishing physical work. But it was his face that commanded attention. Angular, uncompromising, dominated by a pair of eyes the color of a distant thunderstorm, eyes that had seen too much human suffering and judged everything he surveyed. "Arthur Stone, ma'am," he stated, his voice low, measured, and devoid of any attempt at false deference. He spoke the name as if daring her to challenge it. Vivienne sat upright, positioning her velvet chair as a figurative throne to maintain a necessary psychological distance. "You fought in the war, Mr. Stone, on the opposing side." "I did," he confirmed, his voice flat. "For 4 years. I saw the end of it." He offered no apology, no boast, just the unassailable, cold fact of his past. "And now you come to Blackwood, seeking to profit from the peace you helped create?" she challenged, her tone sharp with the full weight of her grief and resentment. Arthur's gaze did not break. His eyes, though hard, held a flash of something akin to shared bitterness. "I seek honest work, Mrs. Beaumont. I lost everything, same as you. My small mortgaged farm, my family's past, my purpose. The war is over, but the land does not care which flag you followed. or how much silver you have in your vault. It needs tending. And you, ma'am, need a man who knows how to break the earth and make it yield again, or you will lose it all to the lawyers. He did not beg for the job. He presented an undeniable logical truth, a brutal piece of calculus that bypassed her aristocratic armor. Blackwood needed him to break the soil before the debt broke her spirit. The pay is minuscule, Stone. The work is endless. You will take orders, and you will ask no questions of this estate or its history. Agreed, he replied instantly. I ask for only two things, honest bread and a place to sleep. My loyalty is to the work. Vivienne felt a deep, profound chill that seeped into her bones. She had hired the living embodiment of her greatest grief, a man she was ethically and socially bound to despise. But his quiet, formidable strength was the only defense she had left against total ruin. She desperately needed his knowledge of survival, gained at the expense of her world. You may begin in the south field tomorrow at dawn. You will lodge in the old stable loft. Arthur gave a curt nod. Ma'am? He left the room, leaving behind a silence heavier than before, weighted by fear, hatred, and the strange, deeply unwelcome tremor of pragmatic relief. The first month of Arthur Stone's tenure was a masterclass in silent war. Vivienne treated him as a functional extension of the land itself, a necessary, sturdy tool. Yet, ignoring Arthur was impossible. He was everywhere, working with a relentless, terrifying efficiency that shamed the memory of the previous laborers. He didn't just perform tasks, he anticipated them. He single-handedly repaired the sagging barn, shored up collapsing fencing, and brought the struggling tobacco fields back from the very brink of decay, all without being asked. He moved through the decaying estate like a silent force, slowly willing it back to life, inch by punishing inch. One scorching afternoon, driven by necessity and a growing morbid curiosity, Vivienne ventured into the fields. She found Arthur stripped to the waist, his powerful body slick with sweat. He was swinging an axe against a colossal oak stump, working with a terrifying blend of power and discipline. She found herself staring, not at the laborer, but at the stark realities etched onto him. The long, silvery scars that laced his back and shoulders, eloquent testimony to the brutality of the conflict that had claimed Frederick. Arthur sensed her presence and stopped, his eyes dark as storm clouds meeting hers across the scorched earth. The drainage is terrible here, ma'am, he stated, his voice flat. It's been neglected for years. It needs a trench run before the autumn rains, or the yield will be negligible. If you lose the crop, you lose the estate. The earth demands work, not pride. Vivienne bristled at the implied criticism of her late husband's management. I am aware of the drainage issues, Stone. We do not have the manpower for trenching of that scale. I do. And you expect double wages for the effort? She challenged, deploying the cold superiority of her class to maintain distance and control. Arthur looked at her with an expression of weary pity and profound understanding. I expect nothing more than what we agreed upon, Mrs. Beaumont. I'm simply telling you what must be done to save your harvest. It doesn't matter if your name is Beaumont or if mine is Stone. The earth demands what it demands, and the bank demands payment. Survival is the only code that matters now. The rebuke, calm, factual, and based purely on the economics of survival, stung more deeply than any emotional insult. He saw her not as the revered mistress, but as a desperate woman making poor decisions, clinging to hollow tradition while the ground beneath her feet dissolved. You presume far too much, laborer, she whispered, her hands clenched until her nails bit into her palms. I presume only what the ledger tells me, ma'am, he countered, his gaze unwavering. My goal is to keep working. Yours should be to keep me working here. His pragmatism was infuriating, yet tragically correct. He knew the land, the labor, and the cold arithmetic of survival better than she did. He was the only anchor she had left. Swallowing the dry, bitter draft of her pride, she finally acquiesced. Trench the field, Stone, use every available man, and be quick. The necessity of the looming debt forced their worlds to merge. Vivienne could no longer rely on intermediaries. She needed direct daily consultation with Arthur. Their meetings moved from the tense formality of the drawing room to the dusty, practical confines of the carriage house, where they spread rough, often outdated maps of the property. The west pasture is viable for feed, but only if we run sheep, Arthur advised one evening, his large, rough fingertip tracing a line on the aged paper. Sheep? Beaumonts have never raised sheep, Arthur. It is beneath our history, beneath our name. Vivienne protested, clutching fiercely to the last shreds of her aristocratic legacy. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but history does not feed the workers or pay the debt," he replied, his tone low but firm. "Sheep are resilient, cheap, and Mr. Finch will see diversification. It buys us time. Time is what the war took most savagely. Where did you acquire this comprehensive, almost instinctual knowledge, Arthur?" she asked, the first name slipping out accidentally, marking a clear boundary crossed in their tense relationship. He paused, a flicker of pain and memory crossing his face. "I grew up on land much like this, Mrs. Beaumont. Small, poor, but mine. Until the army came for it all. I learned to farm before I learned to fight. And I learned in the war that the only education that matters is how to survive the greed of men and the harshness of the earth." He later confessed more about his past, the seizure of his small farm by the very financial opportunists who now circled Blackwood. He was not a faceless enemy, but a fellow survivor burdened by his own grief and economic displacement. The absolute hatred she had clung to fractured, replaced by a strange, heavy sense of shared sorrow. The true breaking point arrived with a sudden violent storm, common to the region, that threatened the drying hay, her only hope of payment. Vivienne rushed out, terrifyingly exposed to the elements, fueled by desperation. She found Arthur already in the field, shouting orders over the thunder. She struggled with a massive, sodden bale, slipped on the slick mud, and was instantly prepared to fall into the ruin. But Arthur was there. His arms shot out, catching her, one hand firm on her waist, the other on her shoulder. His body was a wall against the wind and rain. Her face was inches from his chest, and she felt the frantic rhythm of his heart matching her own desperate fear. The scent of rain, sweat, and earth was fiercely real, utterly male, and shockingly desirable, a world away from the starched linen and cold perfume of the manor. "Get back inside, Vivienne. It's too dangerous," he commanded, the use of her first name now a primal, desperate declaration that transcended their class roles. She clung to him, not as a mistress to a laborer, but as a shipwrecked soul to solid ground. In the elemental chaos, the walls of class, memory, and enmity dissolved. He was simply her anchor. He held her, his hands lingering on her for a second too long after he steadied her. She retreated to the barn, her lips suddenly dry, watching him work with a fire in her belly that was certainly not fear. The incident ignited a forbidden, desperate spark. They maintained their formal distance during the day, but their eyes held a new, dangerous awareness. Distraught by the final foreclosure notice, Vivienne found herself drifting toward the stable loft that evening, seeking refuge. She found Arthur sitting on a stool, meticulously polishing the saddle Frederick had used, a gesture that simultaneously tore at her guilt and deepened her respect. When her grief finally broke, she confessed her overwhelming fear and sense of failure. Arthur crossed the space and pulled her into a deliberate, devastatingly tender embrace. "You need me because I see you, Vivienne," he countered, holding her face gently. Not as the Beaumont name, or the woman in black, but as the woman fighting to stay whole. He lowered his head. The kiss was the inevitable explosion they had been circling. Fierce, desperate, a collision of two lonely, scarred souls seeking refuge. His lips were demanding, his hands threading into her hair, shattering the last vestiges of her controlled composure. She was kissing the laborer, the enemy, and she felt a terrifying, sweet surrender. The passion was an escape, a profound betrayal of her past, and the joyous death of her control. The emotional intimacy that followed was built on their shared wreckage. Arthur confessed the deep, painful details of his role in the war, his presence at the very battles that had claimed Frederick's regiment. He spoke of his trauma, his loss of faith in any cause, and his current purpose being solely survival. "The guilt is suffocating, Vivienne. I was there. I fought on that ground. My hands are stained by the same war that broke your life," he confessed, his voice a raw whisper. She looked at him, not with the expected aristocratic revulsion, but with a fierce protectiveness. "The war broke you too, Arthur. It broke us both. We are tied not by loyalty, but by shared loss and guilt." The confession did not drive her away. It bound her closer. He did not ask her to forget Frederick. He simply asked her to live. The final, crushing eviction notice arrived a week later. "It's over, Arthur. I lost it all," Vivienne whispered, sinking into the armchair. "No," he asserted, his determination hardening his face. "Not all of it. Arthur revealed his final radical plan. He had leveraged his meager savings and secured substantial capital from an old army contact, a man who trusted Arthur's judgment and work ethic. He could stop the auction and save the physical estate, but only under one condition. He must become the official manager and co-owner. Vivienne would have to sign away the legal ownership to the new partnership. She would trade the pride of the name for the security of the soil. She would be financially, legally, and socially dependent on her former laborer. The choice demanded the ultimate sacrifice, the absolute loss of her social identity, and the control she had fought so fiercely to keep. "I would lose the deed," she whispered, tears finally falling. "I would lose the name. Blackwood Manor would be his and by extension yours. The Beaumonts would be erased. The land would remain," Arthur countered gently. "You would live here. You would guide the crops. You would keep the history alive in the fields. But you would trade the pride for the security, and for a future built on truth and courage." He took her hands, his eyes dark with the weight of the proposal. "I am not asking for a title, Vivienne. I am asking you to trust the man you allowed to survive. I lost everything, but I found a purpose here. I found you. If you agree, then we save it and we build something new. A partnership in the fields, and a life together in that house, where the judgment of old titles holds no power over our happiness." She looked at the final notice, then at the man before her. The pride was empty, the control an illusion. The only thing she had left to lose was her heart, and that, she realized, had been irrevocably lost to him long ago. "Draft the papers, Arthur," she said, her voice clear and steady, accepting her surrender. "We saved the estate." The auction was cancelled. Vivienne, dressed in a resolute gray, signed the documents that stripped her of legal ownership. When the transaction was complete, the bank representative quickly bowed to Arthur Stone, the new co-owner and master of Blackwood. Alone at the drawing room window, Arthur turned to her. "You are not destitute, Vivienne. You are simply free of the debt and the dead weight of a name that was suffocating you." He took her hand, raising her rough, farming-tanned fingers to his lips. "You lost everything that was false. You lost the pride, the fear, the isolation, and your heart. That was the last thing you lost, and it was the first thing you gained." He drew her close. She was no longer just the estate mistress. She was Arthur's partner, Arthur's equal, and the keeper of a heart that, only in being completely lost to the laborer, had finally learned how to beat again with true, unfiltered passion.